There are moments in life when the past you buried comes crashing back in the most unexpected way. A father, convinced his twin daughters were gone forever, discovers them 3 years later singing on a bus, alive but carrying a truth so heavy it shatters not just his heart, but his entire world before the story even begins. Wherever you're watching this video from, drop a comment below and let us know. If you love stories that cut deep and stay with you long after the last word, don't forget to subscribe. Now, settle in because this is a story you won't forget. They say the silence of the West can either save you or bury you. I used to think it saved me. When I first came to this land, it wasn't to start over. It was to disappear. No letters, no goodbyes, just me, the dust, and whatever parts of myself hadn't rotted yet. I found a stretch of nothing 100 miles from the nearest voice, carved out a rough patch of earth, and built a cabin on it. One room, a stove, a bed, and a well. That was enough. Enough to keep the world out and the memories at bay. For 5 years, the world obliged. The days were honest, the nights were long, and the only sounds I heard were whine through dead branches and the groan of wood under my boots. The land didn't care who I was or what I'd done. It just wanted work, and I gave it. But I remember the exact moment that peace ended. It wasn't with a bang, not with thunder or hoofbeats or gunfire. It ended with a sound so quiet it almost didn't exist, a faint scraping near the well. It was near midnight, and I was on the porch, sipping something that burned just enough to dull the edges. The stars were bleeding light across the sky, and the air was cold enough to make your breath feel like smoke. That's when I heard it. That sound. Just a shuffle in the dirt. I wouldn't have noticed if the night hadn't been so damn quiet. At first, I thought it was a coyote nosing around the well, maybe a rabbit too dumb to stay hidden. But something pulled me to my feet. Instinct, maybe. Or the kind of dread that starts in your bones before your brain catches up. I grabbed the rifle out of habit and stepped off the porch. The well sat about 30 feet from the cabin. Circled in stones, I'd placed one heavy block at a time. As I got closer, the moonlight cut through the fog, and I saw it something crumpled beside the stones. Small. Still. Almost looked like a pile of rags. But then it moved. Not an animal. A person. A girl. She was lying face down, her arms twisted underneath her like she'd fallen from a great height. Her skin was dark, dust-covered, and streaked with something darker blood. Her dress was torn, barely holding together, and her breath came in short, rattling gasps. Her whole body trembled like she was trying to hold on to life with teeth and nails. My first thought wasn't heroism. It was survival. I was alone, and alone men don't take risks. A wounded stranger showing up in the dead of night was a red flag the size of a barn. My mind flashed through every possibility. Bandits, traps, retaliation. I should have turned around. Should have left her there. But I didn't. Maybe it was the feather in her hair, carefully braided and half torn out. Maybe it was the blood too much for someone so small. Or maybe it was just that after 5 years of silence, I saw someone more broken than me. I dropped to one knee and turned her over. Her face was barely recognizable, battered and swollen. She had the look of someone who'd been hunted. I carried her inside. My cabin wasn't meant for guests. The bed was barely big enough for one, but I made room. I laid her on the mattress and fetched clean cloth, boiled water, and whatever roots I had left that the old trader claimed could fight off fever. I wasn't a doctor. I was barely a man anymore. But I worked through the night like she mattered. Like saving her would somehow save the part of me that still gave a damn. I kept the fire stoked high. Her skin was ice. I changed her bandages 3 times. She never woke. Sometime just before dawn, I stepped outside for air. The land was quiet again, but it didn't feel the same. The silence was watching me now, like it knew something I didn't. And then I saw them. It started with a single silhouette on the ridge, unmoving, then another, then more, until the horizon was lined with them. Warriors, horses, painted faces. sharp weapons glinting in the rising sun. They didn't shout, didn't charge. They just stood there, a wall of stillness and judgment. 300 at least, maybe more. I knew exactly what they thought. A white man, a dead or dying Apache girl, a cabin too far from law to be protected. There was no room for explanation, no place for words. In their eyes, I was already guilty. I stood on the porch, unarmed. Not because I was brave, but because I knew it wouldn't matter. I didn't pray, I didn't run. I just thought about that glass of water I gave her when I first found her. That single act of mercy, a ripple in the still water of my life. And now, the tide was coming in. If you'd asked me in that moment what I regretted, I wouldn't have said helping her. I would have said the years I spent hiding, thinking silence was peace. But silence isn't peace. It's just the absence of noise. And that morning, noise had come back with a vengeance. I didn't know then what the girl would say when she woke. I didn't know if she'd live. But I knew one thing for sure. My quiet little world was gone. And whatever came next, I would not face it in hiding. Because I had made a choice. And in the West, choices are all a man has. There's a moment when your life doesn't flash before your eyes, but slows down just enough for you to notice how small it really is. I felt that as I stood on the porch, watching the ridgeline bloom with the silhouettes of mounted warriors. 300, maybe more. No banners, no war drums, just stillness. The kind that comes before a strike, or after a death. And in that stillness, I realized something. They hadn't killed me yet. I could feel their eyes from 100 yards away. Eyes that belonged to sons and brothers and fathers. Eyes that had seen loss. Eyes that had buried too many of their own. And in their minds, I had just dug another grave. He saw her. He saw the feather in her hair, the bruises on her arms, the way she barely moved under the wool blanket. And for one heartbeat, the fury in his face cracked. Grief bled through. That's when I knew. She wasn't just one of them. She was one of his. He turned his eyes on me, and what I saw in them was the kind of rage that doesn't scream. It waits. Waits for proof. Waits for a reason not to kill. Behind him, the wall of warriors remained still, but their grip on their weapons had changed. Tighter now. Expectant. The weight of their gaze pressed down on my shoulders like wet sand, and I stood there, mute. The coward who had done the right thing too late. Then, without a word, he stepped past me, walked straight into the cabin. I didn't stop him. There's no point in barring a door that fate's already opened. He knelt beside her. Her skin was still pale, fevered. He touched her wrist gently, like a father checking for a pulse in a sleeping child. I watched his shoulders rise, then drop. Relief or sorrow, I couldn't tell. He stood and turned to face me. Still no words, just a long look, one that stripped the skin from my bones, one that judged not just what I had done, but what I had chosen not to do. Then he stepped out of the cabin and raised his arm. In an instant, the wall of warriors began to move. Not forward, not toward me. They dismounted. It was worse than a charge. They surrounded the cabin, forming a wide circle. Horses tied, weapons drawn but not raised. They were waiting for her, for truth, or for the last breath that would tip the scale toward blood. I didn't go inside. I stayed on the porch, the same place I had stood for 5 years, watching the sun climb and fall. But now the sun felt like judgment. I thought about running. About slipping out the back, into the ravine, disappearing into the hills. But running only works when you have somewhere to run to, and I was out of places. So I sat. On that same wooden chair I'd carved with a dull knife one winter when the cold had nearly taken my fingers. I sat, and I waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed. Sweat ran down my back. The warriors didn't move. They waited in perfect silence. Not a word spoken, not a drumbeat tapped, only the wind dared to make a sound. At some point, I stood. My legs had gone numb. I walked to the well, poured a tin of water, and drank. It tasted like rust and dust. I filled another and brought it inside. She hadn't moved. I checked her pulse again. Weak, barely there. I dabbed her forehead, changed her bandage, whispered things I didn't believe. Not to comfort her, but to remind myself I still knew how to care. Then, just as the sun reached its highest point, her lips moved. Not words. Not yet. Just a groan. A dry rasp. I leaned in, and her eyes opened. Cloudy, confused, pain-filled. And then, recognition. She looked past me, toward the doorway, toward the man who had waited the whole day in stillness, burning with questions. Her eyes locked with his, and something passed between them. Something I couldn't name. Her lips moved again, and this time the sound was clearer. Not me. 2 words. And just like that, the storm cracked. I stepped back. The old warrior pushed through the doorway, dropped to his knees beside her. She reached for him weakly, her hand like a leaf caught in a dying breeze. He held it, and she spoke again, halting, hoarse, but strong enough to be heard. Not him. Again. Over and over. Like a chant, like an exorcism. And outside, I heard it, the shift, the murmur. The armor of rage cracking just enough to let truth in. What she said next, I didn't expect. She didn't describe me. She described others. Faces like stone, voices like knives, men who didn't ask, who didn't speak, who only took. She had escaped them, crawled through hell, and found me. And I had carried her into the fire, thinking I was carrying her to safety. The man beside her, her father, maybe looked up at me, and the weight of his stare had changed. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something quieter, something that might, given time, become trust. She passed out again, her body limp, her voice gone, but it was enough. Outside, the warriors began to move not toward me, but toward their horses, not with anger, but with purpose. Something had changed. The circle was broken. I stepped outside. The man met me halfway. Still no words. Just a look. And a nod. A beginning. They didn't leave. The nod he gave me wasn't a farewell, it was a verdict postponed. And that night, the hills didn't fall back into silence. They breathed with the weight of 100 warriors sleeping on soil that hadn't felt their kind in generations. Their horses grazed near the creek. Fires were lit, but low, hidden by rocks and shadow. And me? I stayed awake. I watched the flickers of orange light dance across the tree line, as if the forest itself had started blinking. Inside, she slept. Deeper now. Her fever had broken sometime after sunset, though her pulse still felt like a thread that could unravel at any second. I changed her bandages, added crushed willow bark to her water, and whispered names I hadn't spoken in years, names of people long dead, names I wasn't sure I had the right to remember. I didn't know if she heard me. Maybe some part of her did, but I wasn't speaking for her. I was speaking for myself, for the man I used to be. At some point, the cabin door creaked open. I turned fast, hand on my rifle, but stopped when I saw who it was. A boy, no older than 12. Dark eyes, dirt on his cheeks, hair tied back with a leather cord. He said nothing, just stepped inside and looked at the girl, then at me. In his hand, he held a small bundle wrapped in hide. He walked slowly to the bedside and placed it next to her, then turned and left. I didn't follow him. The gesture spoke louder than any word. Inside the bundle were herbs I recognized, and some I didn't. Healing things, sacred things, things that meant trust, or at least the beginnings of it. I crushed the leaves, boiled them with what little clean water I had left, and spooned it slowly into her mouth. She didn't resist. She lived. By morning, she could sit up, barely. Her voice was still a whisper, but her eyes had sharpened, focused, alive. The kind of alive that remembers pain vividly. She didn't look at me the way people look at saviors. She looked at me like someone staring at a question with too many wrong answers. And I understood. I would have done the same. I brought her food, soft beans, boiled wild potatoes, and she tried to eat. Tried. Her hand shook, and most of it spilled onto the blanket. I didn't help. Sometimes dignity matters more than speed. That evening, the old man returned. He didn't come alone this time. 3 women followed him, one gray-haired, one middle-aged, one barely older than the girl herself. All of them wore layered deerskin and carried baskets filled with vials, roots, powders. They walked in silence, but not submission. They were here to tend, not ask. To take over what I had started. And I let them. They worked for hours. They stripped her wounds, reapplied salves, combed her hair, checked her eyes, her ears, her ribs, all of it, methodical and sacred. At one point, they sang a low, humming thing that vibrated in the bones more than the air. I stepped outside and sat on the porch again. The air smelled like pine sap and burnt sage. The fires in the hills had grown brighter. Drums now, faint, distant. A rhythm like a slow heartbeat. Not war, not yet, but memory. The old man sat beside me without a word. We didn't look at each other, just stared at the trees. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a long pipe, packed it, lit it, smoked, then handed it to me. I took it. Not because I needed to, but because it would have been an insult not to. The smoke burned my throat. My eyes watered. He said nothing, and neither did I. After a while, I spoke. I didn't touch her, I said. He didn't respond. I found her in the well, barely alive. Still silence. They'll come looking for her, I added. That made him turn. His eyes, dark and endless, narrowed just enough for me to see something behind them. Recognition. Or maybe warning. She said she escaped them, I continued. But not who they were. He took the pipe back, inhaled, and finally spoke. They are ghosts, he said. But they wear men's faces. I felt the cold rise inside me, despite the heat of the fire. Bandits? I asked. No, he said. Worse. And then he said nothing else. That night, I dreamed again. But it wasn't her face I saw. It was mine reflected in still water. And behind me, the shadow of a woman I'd buried 6 winters ago. Her voice was faint, broken by wind. You never left the fire, she said. I woke with a gasp. Sweat soaking my shirt. My hands clenched. The fire had gone out. The air was thick with night sounds, crickets, owls, the distant howls of wolves. But underneath it all, something else. A hum. Low. Mechanical. Wrong. I crept outside, barefoot, rifle in hand. And then I saw them 2 figures at the edge of the woods. Too far to shoot. Too still to be animals. No fire. No sound, just watching. They didn't move, neither did I. I backed into the cabin slowly, locked the door, and sat by the window all night. When morning came, they were gone. But they had left something behind. On the edge of the well, carved into the wood, was a symbol. A jagged circle split down the middle. He didn't recognize it. But she did. She saw it when she came outside later that day, limping on a cane one of the women had carved. She froze. Her lips trembled. And for the first time, she grabbed my arm. Her fingers drew into my skin like claws. I didn't ask what it meant. I already knew it meant we weren't alone anymore. And they weren't waiting. She spoke that morning. Her voice was like worn fabric, rough, uneven, frayed at the edges, but her words were sharp. Too sharp for someone who had just escaped death. She said her name was Nayeli. In her tongue, it meant, I am the wind that leaves but returns. I didn't ask if that was her real name or a name she gave herself after crawling out of hell. It didn't matter. A name is only as real as the breath behind it, and she still had breath. She sat by the fire, wrapped in a buffalo hide, eyes locked on the carving near the well. That symbol, that broken circle. They burn the ground they walk on, she whispered. I didn't interrupt. They wear our skins, she said. Not just metaphor. They take from us. Hair, teeth, flesh. Hang it from their belts like trophies. They call themselves hunters, but they are not men. She paused, stared at the fire, then added, They don't eat for hunger. They eat for silence. To make the world forget we were here. Her hands trembled. The one with the silver face, he marks the chosen. He doesn't kill. He keeps. For the games. I felt my stomach turn. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. Years ago, when I still wore a badge and walked among lawmen, I had found something. A camp in the Rockies. Hidden. Black tents, spiked with bones. 6 bodies. Not just killed, emptied. Faces peeled, ribs spread open like books. The men I was with said it was ritual, savage work of a mountain tribe, but I knew better. There were no tracks, no signs of tools, no blood trails. Just silence. I never spoke of it again. Until now. I've seen their work, I told her. Years back. She nodded once. They grow bolder now, trade our people like pelts, move from forest to forest, hill to hill, never staying long. And you? I asked. How did you? I was bait, she said. They took my sister. I followed. I tried to trade myself for her. They laughed. Her voice cracked, just once. But it was enough. I escaped during a storm. Mudslide. They thought I died. I crawled for 3 days. Fell into your well on the 4th. I didn't ask what happened to her sister. Some things you don't ask. That evening, the old man returned. But this time, he brought the chief. A man they called Red Elk. Towering, silent, face carved from stone. Eyes blacker than coal. His hair reached his waist, braided with feathers and clawed beads. He didn't enter the cabin. He stood by the doorway and waited. Nayeli saw him, said nothing, but her eyes welled. He nodded. That one nod told me everything. She was one of his own. Maybe blood. Maybe something deeper. They spoke in their language for a long time. Low, melodic syllables mixing with fire crackle. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the rhythm. It wasn't mourning, it was planning. When they finished, Red Elk turned to me. You saw them too, he said. I nodded. He studied me, then reached into his satchel and pulled out a feather. White. Hawk. He placed it on the cabin floor. If you stand with us, he said, you will wear this. And if I don't, he didn't blink. Then you will be buried with it. That night, the council was held. In a half-circle near the creek, surrounded by the drums and flickering fire, the warriors sat, women behind them. Children tucked in close. Nayeli was brought forward, weak but standing. She spoke, not just about the ghosts in the woods, but about me. She told them I saved her, fed her, dressed her wounds, risked death. She didn't lie for me. She just didn't omit truth. And that was enough. One by one, the warriors laid down symbols, stones, beads, feathers before her feet. A gesture of honor. And then they turned to me. And waited. I stood slowly, unsure of the weight in my legs. My name doesn't matter anymore, I said. They waited. I've killed more men than I've saved. I've lied. I've run. And for the last 6 years, I've been hiding in this cabin, hoping no one would find me. Silence. But you found me. I nodded to Nayeli. And now the ghosts are coming. The fire crackled. If you'll have me, I'll stand. I know the land. I know where shadows hide. They looked to Red Elk. He stepped forward, placed the white feather in my hand, and said, then we hunt together? Later that night, after the drums faded and the children slept, I sat alone near the trees. Nayeli came beside me, limping, her face pale but calm. Do you think we can win? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked up at the stars. So many. So bright. The kind of sky that only appears when you're far from everything: laws, cities, guilt. If they bleed, I said, we can kill them. She nodded, then whispered, then we make them bleed. The next day, we began preparing. Scouts were sent, traps laid, caches unearthed. I showed them old mine shafts where smugglers once hid, canyons with acoustic echoes, paths even the deer avoided. We dug trenches, built blinds, painted signals on stones. And all the while, I felt something rising in me. Something old, forgotten. Purpose, not vengeance, not redemption. Something cleaner, something honest. The kind of thing that's hard to hold, but even harder to kill. But peace is a liar. 3 days into the preparations, one of our scouts didn't return. We found his horse, mutilated, tied to a tree with its own entrails. And in the tree bark freshly carved, "He sees you." The ghost-faced man was coming. We buried Chaska beneath the black cedar. His brother wept without sound, laying down a blade carved from deer bone. His mother smeared ash across her cheeks and sat beside the grave until night swallowed the horizon. I didn't know him well, barely a name, but now I carried his weight. He had been the youngest scout barefoot, fearless, always smiling at storms. Now he was bones beneath soil, torn apart by something that didn't leave footprints. That night, the fire didn't warm us. It only reminded us that light could vanish. The elders spoke in half-sentences. Red Elk sharpened his spear but said nothing. The drums were silent. Even the dogs refused to bark. It was Nayeli who broke the silence. "They marked us," she said. She was holding a small wooden figure about the size of a child's hand, carved crudely, with twine wrapped around its neck, left outside the sleeping tents. Not by one of us. They've started the hunt. The next morning, the sky turned gray. Not storm gray, dead gray. The kind of sky that doesn't move. The kind that holds its breath. We doubled the watches, moved the children deeper into the ravine, covered the trail paths with ash to detect footprints. But they didn't use trails. That afternoon, we found the elk herd. Not killed, not eaten, just ease removed. Each one, dozens. As if something wanted to see through them. By dusk, the tension had shattered into whispers and panic. Some warriors wanted to leave, go east, find the army, find law. But there's no law for ghosts, and no army rides this deep into forgotten land. Red Elk called for silence. He stood in the center of camp and raised his hands. "They want us afraid," he said. Then he pointed to me. "But he knows fear. He lived with it. I didn't want their eyes, but I had them." So I spoke. "I used to wear a badge," I said, "back when I still believed in men. They watched me. 6 years ago, I tracked a raiding group through the Black Canyons. Bandits. Real monsters. They'd hit a mining town, killed everyone. Men. Women. Infants." My hands clenched. "I found them drunk in a gulch. 6 of them. Laughing, covered in blood. I had the drop. Could have arrested them. But I looked down. I lit their camp on fire. Shot anyone who ran. Didn't even check if they were armed." I looked at Nayeli. Her eyes didn't flinch. "But it wasn't enough," I said. "Because 3 days later, when I returned to town," I paused. "They were still alive." That part never made sense. Not to me. Not to the marshal. Not to the flames I had watched consume them. But they came back. Their faces melted, their limbs twisted, but their eyes intact. Eyes that watched me through smoke. Eyes that followed me when I ran. They wore hoods, I told the tribe. Faces of ash. One had silver skin. The air turned cold. "That's when I stopped being a lawman," I said. "That's when I started hiding." Red Elk nodded slowly. "They remember," he said. "You scarred them." I shook my head. "No, they scarred me." That night, the dreams returned. Not dreams exactly. Something older. I was back in the flames. The campfire turned funeral pyre. Screams in the distance. The stench of burning hair. And always, always those eyes. Watching. Measuring. Choosing. I woke to Nayeli shaking me. "There's smoke," she said. We ran to the ridge. And saw it. Black plumes. Thick. Too thick for brush fire. The southern tree line was ablaze. But there was no wind. No lightning. No reason. We stood there, frozen. until a child screamed. At first, I thought it was panic. Then I saw what you pointed at. Across the ridge, just above the flames, figures. Tall, wrong-shaped, like men stretched on racks. One of them had a white mask, not painted. Bone. Another had feathers sewn into his skin. And the last, shorter but broader, wore a necklace of fingers. They stood still, unmoving, but not silent. Somewhere, just beneath the crackle of fire, we heard it. Whispers. I stepped forward. Red Elk stopped me. They want a reaction, he said. They'll get one, I answered. But he didn't move. Because behind those three figures, the trees were shifting. Not swaying, shifting. Like something enormous was breathing beneath them. That night, we reinforced every boundary, dug deeper trenches, doused every torch after use. Even the children were armed with knives. But it wouldn't matter. Not if we didn't act. So we planned a raid. Not to kill, to capture. We needed answers. Because one truth had become clear. These things weren't just hunters. They were testing us. The next morning, just before sunrise, I took 3 warriors and Nayeli. We followed the burnt tree line south, tracking the scent of ash. Then we saw it. A totem, 20 feet high, made of bones. Human, animal, twisted together with sinew. At its base, fresh blood. And something else? Oscul, with a U.S. cavalry insignia still nailed to the forehead. Nayeli bent down, touching the earth. Still warm, she said. We're close. Too close. That's when we heard the rustle. Then the breathing. And then the scream. We didn't see it coming. Not really. We heard the rustle, yes, the breathing. But nothing could have prepared us for what came out of those trees. It wasn't like the others. It was faster, smaller, crawling on limbs that weren't its own. I fired. Twice. The first shot missed, the second hit something flesh, maybe because it shrieked, not like a man, not like an animal, like something remembering pain for the first time in centuries. Red Elk tackled it. 2 others piled on. We tied its arms behind its back with buffalo sinew, wrapped its head in a wool cloth soaked in ash water to blind it, then dragged it back to camp. It didn't fight. Not once, but it never stopped breathing. Shallow, wet, wrong. Nayeli sat beside it as we placed it in the center of the ravine, in the ring of salt and fire. It lay on its side, bare chest heaving, back covered in old brands. Human brands. Military issue? Someone had owned this thing. When we peeled back the cloth from its face, half the tribe screamed. Even Red Elk took a step back. He didn't. Because I recognized it. Not the face, no. There wasn't a face, but the skin. It was stitched from others. Pale parts, brown parts, even a patch of blue with faded ink. It had no mouth. No nausea. Just 2 black, insect-like eyes. Sewn to a head that pulsed when it breathed. And where the mouth should have been, thick black stitches sewn in a perfect circle. What is it? Someone whispered. I didn't answer, because I knew what it was. It was one of them, but not whole. Not yet. Nayeli leaned in. She reached for a small bone needle tied to her necklace, and began to unpick the stitches. Red Elk moved to stop her. He didn't. We needed answers. We needed truth. When the last thread came loose, it didn't scream. It didn't speak. It spat. Right into the fire. The flames turned green for half a second. Then it began to chant. Low, broken. A language I'd never heard, but one I felt. In my teeth, my spine, in the back of my skull. What's it saying? Nayeli asked. But someone else answered. Not one of us. A voice from the dark. I can translate. We turned. An old man stood at the ridge, covered in travel dust. No weapons. No pack. Just a silver medallion around his neck and the remains of an old cavalry uniform beneath his coat. His face was gaunt, hollow, but his eyes were awake. Too awake. Red Elk stepped forward, spear raised. "Who are you?" The old man smiled. "They called me surgeon once," he said. Then he pointed to the creature on the ground. "That one there? I made him." You could feel the silence. Like all the trees had stopped breathing. Nayeli stood slowly. "You made this?" The old man nodded. "Flesh doesn't forget. Not if you carve it the right way." Then he squatted beside the creature. "Still remembers me, don't you, boy?" The thing flinched. We took him into the circle. Not out of mercy, out of need. We fed him, let him warm by the fire. Then we asked questions. Too many, and he answered. Too clearly. He told us about the Whisper program, a military project from 30 years past, before borders shifted, before reservations, before treaties turned to graves. A project to use sympathetic flesh, old magic, ancient pain, to build warriors that couldn't die. Pain binds better than steel, he said. The old tribes knew it. We just industrialized it. I almost shot him right there, but I needed more. They escaped, he continued. 15 of them took the wrong bodies, got confused, became something else. He looked to the trees. They worship something now, something older than me. What do they want? Nayeli asked. He smiled. To be seen. That night, Red Elk made a decision. We would take the creature, the one we caught, and offer it in trade. A meeting. Parley. Before the blood boiled over. It was madness. But it was the only move left. I volunteered to go. So did Nayeli. And so did one other. Little Smoke. He wasn't a warrior. Barely 15. Quiet. Always drawing on bark with charcoal. But he stepped forward. I've seen them, he said. We stared. In my dreams. I know where they wait. So the three of us set out, carrying the creature in a sling of woven hide, its eyes bound in soot cloth. Little Smoke led. Through thorns. Past old bones. Into a clearing shaped like a spiral. They were waiting. 9 of them. Tall, crooked, like men skinned and reassembled. Each one had a face taken from another. One wore a miner's grin, another a preacher's sorrow. But the one in the center, wore my face. I stepped forward. The creature behind us began to sob. Not scream. Sob. Like a child sent home from war. The one with my face opened its arms. And behind it, something moved. Not a person. Not a beast. A shadow made of others. Tied together in a circle. Crawling over each other, weeping. And in the center, a throne made of spines. Speak, I said. My voice shook. Tell me what you want. The thing with my face didn't move its lips. But I heard it anyway. Inside me. All it said was, trade. I should have known they'd ask for her. Not me. Not the boy. Her. Nayeli stood behind me, one hand resting on her knife, the other clutching the edge of her shawl like it might shield her from the words we'd just heard. Trade. That voice again, not spoken, not whispered, but felt. Behind my ribs, in the wet pulp of my spine, like a worm trying to climb its way to the surface. I turned to Little Smoke. His eyes were wide, unblinking. Did you hear that too? I asked. He nodded slowly. They want her, he said, barely louder than the wind. The creature we'd captured, the one we'd dragged all this way, began to squirm in its bindings. Not struggling, begging, like it was trying to crawl back into their arms. Or maybe flee from what it knew was coming. Nayeli stepped forward. What happens if we say no? She wasn't afraid. Not the way I was. One of the creatures, the tallest, with a stitched preacher's face and no eyes, stepped forward. Its arms were too long, its hands dragging across the dirt. With a single fluid motion, it opened its chest. Not cut, not tore, just opened. Inside, there was a mouth. Human teeth. Hundreds of them. Each one belonged to someone. It didn't speak. It smiled, We left without another word. Little Smoke led the way. The thing with my face watched me until the trees swallowed us whole. Back at camp, chaos had already taken root. The old man, the surgeon, was gone, just vanished. No tracks, no scent. Only a single item left behind, a bundle of parchment stitched from flesh. Inside it, names. Dozens of them, written in charcoal and blood. Names from the reservation. Names from old army rolls. Names of the missing. One of them was Nayeli's. Another was mine. Red Elk wanted answers. I gave what I had. Not enough. Nayeli spoke next. Told the tribe everything. About the trade. About the throne of spines. About the mouth inside the chest. And about what they'd asked for. When she finished, there was silence. Then, from the back of the crowd, someone shouted, "Maybe we should give them what they want." His name was Two Hands. A hunter. Strong. Quick. Also jealous. Of Red Elk. Of me. Of her. He stepped forward, spear lowered. "They come for her," he said, loud enough for all. "She's the one they want. She brought them here. Maybe if we give her back." Red Elk punched him. Hard. But the wound was already made. The idea had been planted. And you can't punch it out. That night, Nayeli left. Slipped away without a word. She didn't run. She walked. Right into the trees. Into the dark. I followed her trail before first light. Didn't tell Red Elk. Didn't take water. Didn't stop. Just walked. I found her by the old riverbed. Kneeling, not crying. Just waiting. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. "They're watching," she said. I knew. I felt it too. "They're not gods," I said. She nodded. "But they remember what gods were." We sat in silence. I told her about the names. How hers was on the list. How mine was too. She asked me why. I told her the truth. I didn't know. Not yet. Suddenly, the brush behind us cracked. Fast. Too fast for man. I drew my rifle. She reached for her knife. But the figure that emerged wasn't one of them. It was Little Smoke. Blood on his hands. Terror in his eyes. "They killed Red Elk," he whispered. We ran. Back to camp. The fires were out. Tents torn. Zalt circle broken. Half the tribe was gone. Not dead. Gone. No bodies. No blood. Just missing. We found 3 Rivers, the old scout, leaning against a stone, coughing blood. He gripped my wrist before I could speak. "They came through the dreams," he rasped. "Not the woods." "What does that mean?" I asked. But he was already gone. Nayeli turned to Little Smoke. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She reached into his coat, pulled out a medallion. Silver. Circular. With the surgeon's emblem. "You were with him," she said. Little Smoke trembled. "He said they would stop if I helped." "What did you give them?" I asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "A way in. The dream path. The salt was meant to keep them out. But dreams? That was another door. And someone had to open it from the inside. Someone innocent. Someone trusted. We couldn't kill him. Not Little Smoke. Not the boy who once carved sparrows into driftwood and gave them away for nothing. But we couldn't take him with us either. So we left him. Teed. Fed. Facing the dawn. We buried Red Elk by the river, wrapped in elk hide, face painted with ash. I placed my rifle across his chest. He would have hated that. Too modern, he used to say. But he was mine. And I was his. So it was fitting. That night, Nayeli dreamed again. She woke with a word on her lips. Nima Tar. She didn't know what it meant. But I did. Old tongue. From a people that vanished before even the first tribes took root. It meant the one who returns by pieces. They weren't just taking people. They were building something. Piece by piece. Soul by soul. And the final part? It wasn't Nayeli. It wasn't me. It was something else. Still buried. still waiting. We had to stop them. But first, we had to find the surgeon. He was the key, the origin, and according to Nayeli's dream, he'd gone to the Red Hollow. A place no map marked. But I knew it, because I'd been there once, as a soldier. And what we did there? It was why I ran. The Red Hollow was no place for men running from their past or for those chasing shadows. I'd been there once, years ago, when the world was young and my sins were fresh. I thought I'd buried that place beneath miles of dust and regret. But like a cancer, it had a way of creeping back. Now, as we rode toward that cursed canyon, I could feel its weight pressing down on me, cold and unrelenting. The path to Red Hollow wound through twisted pines and ragged cliffs. The sun barely pierced the canopy, casting long, sinister shadows that flickered like ghosts. Nayeli rode beside me, silent but steady, her eyes fixed ahead. Little Smoke sat behind us, hands clenched tight around the reins, his face pale and unreadable. We were a quiet procession, the air heavy with things unsaid. I remembered how it began. Years ago when I was still wearing the uniform, a young soldier with too many orders and too few questions. The orders brought us here, to this forgotten scar on the earth. Red Hollow was a hidden camp, a laboratory of nightmares. The government's secret project to weaponize pain, to create soldiers that didn't bleed, didn't feel. Flesh stitched with metal, bones wired with chemicals. We were told it was for the greater good. But all I saw were broken bodies, stitched like puppets, eyes empty as stars. That night, the surgeon arrived. Cold. Calculating. He wore a silver medallion, the same one Little Smoke carried now, the one that tied us all together. He was a man who'd lost his humanity piece by piece, trading it for power and science. We rode through the hollow, the ground cracked and dry, bones buried beneath the dust. Nayeli led the way, her instincts sharp, the whispers of her ancestors guiding her steps. We passed crumbling buildings, rusted cages, blood-stained tables, and abandoned instruments of torture. The ghosts of the past clung to every corner, their silent screams echoing in the wind. Suddenly, the ground trembled. From the shadows emerged figures stitched and twisted, moving with unnatural grace. They whispered. They remembered the surgeon. And they remembered us. The battle was swift and brutal. Arrows sliced through the thick air, rifles cracked, and the cry of war shattered the stillness. Nayeli moved like a force of nature, her blade singing death to those abominations. I fired, shot after shot. Every pull of the trigger a plea for redemption. But the surgeon appeared, calm amidst the chaos. His eyes gleamed with cold fury as he faced us. You think you can undo what's been done? His voice was a blade. We didn't answer. We fought with everything we had. The fight dragged on until dawn painted the sky in blood and fire. When silence finally fell, the surgeon lay broken, his medallion cracked beneath him. But the victory felt hollow. The wounds ran deeper, because the real battle wasn't out there in the shadows. It was inside us, the past we couldn't outrun. The pieces of ourselves we'd lost along the way. As the sun rose, we gathered our fallen and prepared to leave. Nayeli turned to me, eyes fierce but weary. This isn't over, she said. She was right. The journey back would test us in ways no battle could. Because the true enemy wasn't the whispered. It was the darkness within. The morning after Red Hollow was quieter than any I had ever known. The kind of quiet that doesn't just fill the air, it suffocates it. It clung to the trees, to the cracked earth beneath my boots, and somehow settled into the very marrow of my bones. We moved slow. The weight of what we'd done, what we'd seen, hung heavy in the space between us. Nayeli was the first to break the silence, but not with words. She didn't need to. Her eyes told the story, the fire of a warrior clashing with the exhaustion of a survivor. We were all survivors in our own way. Little Smoke barely spoke. He kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, but I could see the turmoil eating away at him. The medallion lay heavy against his chest, a constant reminder of the chains he'd helped unlock. But the darkest shadow wasn't the whispered we had destroyed. It was within. Within the tribe. By midday, whispers were growing like wildfire through the camp. Mistrust. Accusations. Fear. Two Hands was gone, slipped away into the trees before noon, leaving behind nothing but angry silence and half-formed threats. I heard the rumors that Nayeli's survival was a curse, that the man-me was a danger, that the boy who'd walked the path of betrayal still walked free among us. I wanted to bury those rumors deep, but the truth was raw and bleeding, because the tribe wasn't whole anymore. It was fracturing, and the wounds were opening wider with every hour. That night, I found Nayeli by the fire. She was staring into the flames, her face ghostly in the flickering light. I sat beside her, the crackle of burning wood the only sound between us. "I'm scared," she said finally. "Not of the enemy outside the camp, not of the ghosts in the hills, but of the enemy within." I told her the story I had buried deep in my own chest, about the war I'd fought long ago, the choices I'd made, the blood on my hands, the price of survival. She listened, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding I hadn't expected. She took my hand. "You are not your past," she said, "but your past will shape what you do next." That moment was broken by a shout from the edge of the camp. It was Red Elk's daughter, her voice urgent, cracking. "There's movement in the north." We gathered quickly. The tribe assembled, weapons drawn. But what we saw was worse than any enemy. Two Hands stood at the edge of the trees, flanked by a small group of men. They carried torches and weapons. "I'm tired of hiding," Two Hands shouted. "This isn't your fight, stranger." He pointed at me. "This is our home. Our war." I stepped forward. "We are fighting for all of us." His laugh was bitter. "You've brought death here." The standoff stretched, tense and brittle, until Nayeli stepped beside me. Her voice was steel. "We are one tribe, or we are none." Two Hands snarled, but his resolve faltered. The moment shattered as a scream pierced the night. The camp erupted into chaos. A figure cloaked, moving like a shadow, darted through the tents. Shots rang out. I chased the figure into the dark, through twisted trees and rocky outcrops, heart pounding, blood boiling. Then, in a clearing lit by moonlight, I saw the truth. The traitor, not Two Hands, not the boy, but someone else. The surgeon, alive, grinning like a demon unleashed, holding a knife stained with fresh blood. He lunged at me. I dodged, firing a shot that grazed his shoulder. He laughed. "Did you really think it would be so easy? We fought like men possessed. Fists, knives, gunshots, a brutal ballet under the stars." But he was fast. Too fast. Just when I thought it was over, Nayeli appeared. With a howl, she drove her blade into the surgeon's side. He howled, staggering back. We didn't wait. We bound him tight. His cold eyes promised retribution. Back at camp, the tribe gathered around. The truth spilled out. The surgeon had been the puppet master, the whisperer behind the traitor's mask. He'd used fear to divide us, hunger for power to poison our hearts. But now, broken and captured, he was ours. Nayeli's voice rose over the crowd. "We choose our fate." That night, under the endless sky, the tribe made their decision. To stand united, to heal, to fight the darkness both outside and within. I looked at Nayeli, the girl who'd become so much more. Our scars, our losses, our victories, they bound us together. We were no longer just survivors. We were something new, something stronger. The dawn promised battle, but also hope, because the greatest war wasn't against monsters. It was against the shadows that live inside every man, and together we would face it. The sky was a bruise of dark purples and angry reds as dawn crept over the horizon. That morning carried the weight of every broken promise, every lost soul, every battle fought and yet to come. The silence before the storm wasn't just quiet. It was the breath held in the chest of a world ready to break. I stood on the ridge overlooking the valley where the final reckoning would unfold. Beside me, Nayeli tightened the leather straps on her boots, her eyes sharp and unyielding like the desert sun. The tribe gathered behind her, faces painted with determination and scars, hands wrapped around weapons carved by ancestors who had fought their own wars. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival, about justice, about reclaiming a world stolen by monsters who wore the masks of men. The captured surgeon sat bound near the campfire, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. His once cold gaze was now flickers of fear and rage. But even broken, he was dangerous, a twisted mind that had orchestrated so much pain, so much bloodshed. Nayeli approached him, her voice calm but cutting. You took everything from us. Our freedom, our families, our dignity. He spat on the ground. I only showed the world its true nature. She didn't flinch. We will show you what true nature means. Plans had been drawn long into the night, maps etched in the dirt, whispers of strategy and hope mixed with the scent of sage and smoke. The ghost-faced men, the slavers, the hunters of flesh and spirit had made their last mistake by coming into this land. We would make sure they paid with everything. When the sun finally burned through the morning haze, the army moved like a wave of wrath across the valley. I rode beside Nayeli, our horses kicking up dust that swallowed the earth behind us. There was no turning back. The enemy camp lay sprawled beneath us, a crude fortress of logs and desperation. Men with faces cold as ice patrolled the perimeter, unaware that the reckoning was upon them. We descended like a thunderclap. Arrows flew silent and deadly, finding their marks before screams could rise. Rifles cracked with brutal precision. The warriors of the tribe moved like shadows, swift and merciless. I took position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the carnage. The long rifle in my hands was more than a tool, it was an extension of my will, the culmination of all I'd lost and fought for. Every shot I fired was a promise, a vow carved into the very air. Amid the chaos, Nayeli was a whirlwind of fire, cutting through the enemy lines. Her blade danced, an art of survival honed by pain and purpose. She moved toward the heart of the camp, where the leaders hid behind walls of greed and cruelty. The surgeon's men fought with desperation, their faces twisted by fear and fanaticism. But they were no match for the fury of a tribe united and a man who knew these lands like the back of his weathered hands. The battle stretched on for hours, each moment a heartbeat closer to the end. And then, at the center of the camp, Nayeli faced the captain, a monstrous man with eyes like pits of black fire. They clashed, steel singing, sparks flying. I could see it all from my vantage. The captain was strong, but Nayeli was relentless. With a final, brutal strike, she sent him crashing to the ground. The war cry that erupted from the tribe was raw and pure. The enemy's resistance crumbled. Men fled like shadows, chased by dawn. When the smoke cleared, the valley was silent except for the heavy breaths of the victorious. The tribe gathered around the fire, their faces lit by flames and the quiet pride of survival. Nayeli sat beside me, her hand finding mine, a silent pact forged in the heat of battle. The surgeon, broken and defeated, was left for the lawless world beyond the valley. We didn't celebrate. There was no joy in what had been lost or the price we'd paid, only a quiet resolve. That night, under a sky thick with stars, the tribe shared stories of pain, of courage, and of hope reborn. I realized then that my exile was over. I had found a family, a purpose, a home. The silence that had once haunted me was replaced by the rhythm of life, the crackling fire, the whispered prayers, the steady beat of hearts that refused to break. I looked at Nayeli and knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, not as strangers from different worlds, but as brothers and sisters bound by blood, by choice, and by the unbreakable spirit of the West. This was not the end. It was a beginning. Thank you for riding this journey with me. The Wild West holds many secrets, but none as fierce as the human heart. Until the next story, may your courage never falter and your spirit ride free. If you were in the shoes of the main character, would you have fought the same battle? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it. Explore the other videos on screen for more unforgettable stories.